Hey everybody, Andre here, and today we're going to ask Google about the top 10 most asked music theory related questions. Let's go. So I think this could be a fun experiment just to see if you can ask a question on Google or, some other similar AI search model and expect to receive an answer that can sort of be trusted. So just to know where I'm coming from, I am a music theory educator, I'm a composer, musical performer in many, many ways, and I've been teaching music for a very long time, and so I am qualified to answer these questions. So we'll see if these questions are answered correctly using Google. All right, here's the prompt. I asked Google top 10 most asked music theory questions on Google. And here's what came up, and you can see I have this put up here, so we're just going to go through it, and we're going to see how they answered it, and then my reaction to it, essentially. So the overview is, these are the top 10 most frequently asked music theory questions on Google, ranging from basic notation to advanced harmony, along with some quick answers. Number 1, what is a key signature, and how do I identify a key? What it says here is, a key signature tells you which notes are to be played sharp or flat throughout the piece, establishing its home key. And then it gives you some examples. No sharps or flats is C major or A minor. One flat is F major or D minor. And then it gives you a helpful link to dummies.com, where you can learn more rules for decoding these. That's really interesting. And so over here on the right, it gives you some, where the sources that it's drawing from, and my face is obscuring some of it. But so yeah, I mean, that's essentially correct. That's what a key signature does. It tells you what notes to play sharped or flatted. It doesn't do a deep dive on the topic, which I'm sure if we asked, can you tell me more, we can ask it to go further. But so far, yeah, if you wanted a bare bones answer to a question, what is a key signature? Sure, that makes sense. It doesn't tell you about the circle of fifths, although I do see down there, there is a little bit of a circle of fifths thing, so I guess we'll get to it. But yeah, a key signature? Sure, good job. If you want to learn about what a key signature is, you can ask Google. Is music theory just math? No, but they share deep connections. Music theory deals with frequencies, ratios, and rhythm, meter, while composition and performance focus on emotional expression, making them far more creative than pure mathematics. This is a very subjective answer. While composition and performance focus on emotional expression, they can. Surely they can, but they don't have to. You can do composition just for the math. You can also probably do math just for the emotional expression, although that's probably harder. I don't do math. I'm not a math expert, so don't quote me on this. But yeah, is music theory just math? Of course not. Music theory is a way for us to describe things that have happened in music. So it's a way for us to have a descriptive way of identifying trends, especially when we go through and we learn quote unquote music theory through most commonly common practice, or even learning about the jazz language and even 20th century stuff. We look at examples, and we can see, here are the things that tend to occur a lot in these different examples. Like, for example, the first question, what is a key signature? Having a key center or a key area for a piece is a very common thing. So we can use music theory to trace certain commonalities that happen among pieces that share a key signature. This is just one example, right? So no, music theory is not just math. Music theory is a very wide-ranging language, essentially, of describing the music that we hear and see across many, many, many generations. All right, question number 3, and I can tell you right away that this question, I'm not the biggest fan of both the question and the answer here. So, what are the 7 modes in music? The 7 modes are scales derived from the major scale, starting on a different scale degree for each mode. Ionian is major, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, which is minor, and Locrian. First of all, there are not just 7 modes in music. There are lots of different kinds of modes, and there are different modes for different kinds of scales. It's not just the major scale. With the major scale, we call them diatonic modes because they are related to the key. And so that's probably a better way to describe it, right? A diatonic mode is a mode which, by the way, is just a different, it's the same notes, but starting on a different pitch from the original scale. So a major scale has 7 pitch classes, and you have 7 modes for each of those pitch classes, right? So the first one, Ionian, is just the major scale. It starts on the same note. And Dorian starts on the second note of a major scale. Phrygian on the third. So on and so forth. So yeah, different scales have different modes. You know, each of the different minor scale types, natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, all of those 3 have modes too. And they're all going to be different because those 3 scales are different. And it's not just major or minor scales, right? There are other scales out there. Octatonic, hexatonic, whole tone, pentatonic. You have different scales out there. Those are just a few of so many. And each of those is going to have its own amount of modes. Sometimes there's going to be a whole bunch of them. Sometimes there's only going to be a few. Sometimes there's only one way to do a scale. Like a whole tone scale is just whole steps, right? So if you start on any note of a whole tone scale, that's all you get, right? So it's not going to change the way that the scale sounds. It's just going to change the starting note, but essentially it's going to be the same scale, right? So yeah, this is a deceptive question. It's a deceptive answer. But if let's say that the question was, what are the 7 modes of a major scale? I would say this is almost perfect, except for Aeolian. I would rephrase the answer by saying that Aeolian, aka natural minor, because like I said before, there are different variations on minor. You know, there's the natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, just to start. So yeah, so far, first question here, all right. Second question, a little bit weird. Third question, I give this a D minus. What is the circle of fifths? This is the 4th question. It is a visual tool that illustrates the relationships between the 12 tones of the chromatic scale, their corresponding key signatures, and the major or minor keys. Yeah, okay. I think this is a perfectly adequate description of this. It's a visual tool, sure. I think this answer would be improved if we said that each of the different key areas is separated by a perfect fifth. And I suppose you can also say perfect fourth if you're going in another direction. But I would also say that, you know, for the key signatures, you know, it says major / minor keys. We can start to use the words relative keys, the relative major or minor keys, which will tell you that if you have C major, the relative minor is A. They share the same key signature. So, yeah, this is a perfectly adequate answer to this question. I wish it would be expanded more, but okay, fine. What is a tritone? The devil's chord. Yikes. Okay, well, we're going to get back to that in a second. Known historically as Diabolos in Musica, the devil in music. The tritone is an interval spanning 3 whole tones. Example would be C to F sharp. It creates a highly unstable dissonant sound frequently used in horror or attention building. Oh, man. Okay, so the tritone. The devil's chord, first of all, not a chord. For something to be a chord, you need 3 notes. A tritone is only 2 notes, so that makes it an interval or a dyad. So not a chord. Maybe devil's interval, but even that is like that's so suspect and a bit of a myth, you know. So I don't know about that historical stuff. I think that's pretty dubious. But let's dive into the other stuff. So a tritone is an interval. Great. Spanning 3 whole tones? Great. It creates a highly unstable in tonal music. That is correct. It's dissonant because it wants to resolve. Frequently used in horror attention building? Sure, I get that. I think the most interesting thing about a tritone is something that they don't actually mention here, which is the tritone is a function of splitting an octave directly in half. And that is, we wouldn't have our Western idea of tonal music without the tritone, because when you have the tonic which is the main chord of a scale. All right, let's say major scale, and you get to the dominant, which is the fifth note of the scale. So if we start on C, we go C, D, E, F, G. You can have a G7 chord, which is G, B, D, and F. Okay, so what does that have to do? Why is that important? Well, a 5-7-1 is one of the strongest ways to establish that C is tonic, that tonic is tonic. Why does it do that? Well, B is the leading tone to C. So in a G7 chord, in a 5-7 chord, a dominant 7 chord, the third note, the third of the chord, so G, B, that's the third of the chord. That's called the leading tone, and that leads to tonic. B is a half step away from C. Okay, if you have a G7 chord, a 5-7, the F is the seventh of the chord, so G to F, that's a seventh. That wants to resolve inwards, so the F wants to resolve down to E. Okay, and E is the third of C major, which kind of tells us that it's C major rather than something else. Where does the tritone fit in? Well, the first note that we talked about, the B, and that second note that we talked about, the F, that's a tritone. That interval is a tritone, and it wants to kind of work inwards. The B wants to go up to C, and the F wants to go down to E, just by the virtue of these tendency tones within the scale. If the tritone didn't have that kind of symmetrical property, this wouldn't exist, which is really, really kind of fundamental to Western tonal music. So I know that's a lengthy thing, and maybe more than a beginner needs to know, but it's certainly more useful than it's the devil's chord, which is just wrong. So here's another D minus. Do I need to know music theory to write songs? No. Many famous artists and songwriters compose strictly by ear or experimentation. However, as discussed by users on Reddit, learning theory helps you overcome writer's block and understand chord relationships. Okay. This is like the classic question that drives music educators crazy, right? Do I need to learn this thing in order to do this other thing? And yeah, like this answer said, no, you don't need to know music theory to write songs. You don't need to learn. You don't need to know anything. I can just go, cool, I have some music, right? I can start yelling into this microphone, and some people might be upset, but I would still say that's artistic expression. So no, you don't need to know music theory to write songs, but it can't hurt. And some people will say, oh, it stifles my creativity because I need to, music theory forces me to work in the boundaries of it. No, all of that is BS, right? People who say that learning music theory is going to make them less creative, maybe this isn't going to be a hot take, but maybe they weren't that creative in the first place. I think it's just like, why learn how to read? I can just listen to audiobooks. Why learn how to read? It can only help you, right? It can only help you. It can't hurt you. So yes, you don't need to learn music theory to write songs, but why not? It's only going to help. I like what it said here. Learning helps you overcome writer's block. Okay, yeah, sure. That's legit, because sometimes I like to talk about what I call a toolbox in my own music, and if I have a deadline coming up, I don't have a choice, right? I have to make some music. I have to write it down. And am I gonna go to common practice music theory when I'm pulling out of my toolbox? No, I'm not gonna do that, because that's not my world. That's not what I do in my music. But music theory is not just that. If I've been learning all this stuff, I've accumulated all of this knowledge, there's other stuff out there. It's not just 1-4-5-1. So yeah, building up a musical toolbox to draw from, that's it's really useful when you are in those situations where, man, nothing's coming to me, but I got to make it happen because I have a deadline, and deadlines don't care that I have writer's block. This other thing, understand chord relationships. Sure, yeah, you can use music theory to do that. That's a oddly specific one, but music theory is not just chords. Music theory is lots of different things. So I don't know. I don't like that question. What is a secondary dominant? Aha, this is very specific. It is a chord that functions as a dominant, the 5 chord, to a chord other than the tonic. For example, in the key of C, using a D major chord, aka the 5 of 5, to lead into a G major chord, the 5 chord, is a secondary dominant. No notes. This question is a very specific question, and this answer, I think, is quite adequate. It's, for a moment, maybe I would incorporate the word tonicization. For a brief moment, you are highlighting a different chord as a momentary tonic, but you're not actually changing keys. So that's maybe the only thing that I would change here, but otherwise, nice. Good job, Google. What are intervals? An interval is the musical distance in pitch between 2 notes, etc. An example would be a perfect fifth, minor third, or an octave. Again, no notes. This is a great question, and here is a very serviceable answer. You can maybe go a little bit further and say there are different categories of intervals that you can work with. There are something called simple intervals, which are intervals that are an octave or less. And there's compound intervals, which is an octave or more, and they're called compound because they're really just like a tenth, for example, is a third plus 7. It's separated by an octave, and even an octave is a compound interval too because it's a unison plus 7. So there's a bit of that in there. You can also go a little bit further and try to describe, what are the different qualities of intervals, like perfect, major, minor, augmented, diminished. Could talk about that a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, if you're a beginner trying to figure out what an interval is, great. Musical distance in pitch between 2 notes. If someone wrote that on an exam in my fundamentals class, I would give them full credit. What are chord inversions? An inversion occurs when the root of a chord is not the lowest note, aka the bass. For example, in a C major chord, C, E, G, playing E or G as the lowest note creates a first or second inversion, respectively. Once again, we have a very simple question, very good question, and we have an answer that is perfectly adequate, right? It's just a different bottom note, a different low note that changes the chord structure. And I guess we can go further. We can talk about the overtone series and why each of these chord inversions feels so different, how the bass note interacts with the other notes created by the harmonic series above each of those notes. We can talk about that. We can talk about how, root position and first inversion and second inversion in tonal music have quite different functions because of the inherent dissonance or consonance of them. But that's getting into the weeds. If you want to get into those weeds, that's awesome. I guess you can follow this link, which is cool, to the music theory subreddit. By the way, over here for the intervals thing, they reference David Bennett Piano, which I think is a good YouTube channel. You should check that one out. But yeah, no real notes here, folks. Good. And the last question that comes up is, how many beats are in a 4/4 time signature? And it says here there are 4 beats per measure, and a quarter note receives 1 beat. I think that's great. It answers the question exactly. How many beats are in a 4/4 time signature? And again, yeah, we can go further. We can call it, simple time, meaning you subdivide the beat in half. You can say it's quadruple meter because it's 4 beats in the measure. But this is great. Good job. So to recap, if we were to go to Google and ask, what are the top 10 most asked music theory questions on Google, we would get these. And, this first one, fine. Could have done a little bit more. This one is a little bit dubious. It's a bit of a subjective answer here. And if I was asking this question, I would really want some objective answers. I guess no would be the objective answer, but Then the 7 modes, this one was problematic. We talked about that. Circle of fifths one, fine. I would just want to know more. Tritone, we talked about the problematic things here, so this question drives me crazy. We talked about it. And then the last 4 were essentially excellent responses. So I suppose the takeaway is, if you want to ask a very specific question, you're more likely to get a right answer than if you ask something that's a little bit more broad. I mean, that makes sense, right? So yeah, it's an interesting time to be an educator, because anybody with a search engine can just start typing stuff in, and you can get reasonably okay answers, right? So yeah. Am I cooked? Is my job at risk? I don't think so. I think that people are always going to want a little bit more, and you know, it's interesting. It's an interesting time. So if this video was useful to you, if you enjoyed this kind of format, you let me know in the comments. Consider leaving a like on the video. Consider subscribing to the channel. I have lots of different things, a lot of short form content, a lot of my own compositions, and just trying to experiment a little bit with the content that I put out here. So if you like this kind of thing, let me know, and maybe I'll do a part 2. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this was useful. And if I got anything wrong too, you know, feel free to just destroy me in the comments. That would be maybe be kind, but hey, engagement is engagement, right? So anyway, thanks so much for watching, folks. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.